to their futures. Soldiers speak out. 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 We can tell the truth of what we see. We are not liars. Soldiers speak out.
Welcome to the Veterans Hour. My name is Dennis Mills. I'm one of the founding members of Veterans for Peace, Chapter 109 in Olympia, Washington. And with me is another founding member and actually one of our guests that are speaking, and that would be Larry Kerschner. And co-host is Mark Fleming. And tonight, we have a very special series that we've started. It's called Soldier Stories, Paths to Healing and Return. Soldier Stories is a series of programs produced by our chapter, the Rachel Corrie Chapter 109, Veterans for Peace, and it offers veterans such as Larry an opportunity to tell their story, to speak about their combat experience and how that experience has and continues to influence his life. Equally important, Soldier Stories informs our viewers about what a nation asks when it sends men and women into combat. Our viewers will learn the choices that humans must make in war. They'll learn, too, that war comes home when the warrior comes home, but the war continues on in many cases.
And the reason we're doing this is that the veteran is forever transformed by the experience of war, by the task demanded of combat. And the transformation is often destructive to the individual, to his family, his friends, to anyone who's intimate with the veteran, and also to the society that ordered the veteran to make that sacrifice. Dr. Edward Tick, author of War and the Soul, describes the combat experience as a spiritual wound that heals with difficulty. Dr. Tick teaches, Dr. Tick teaches that the veteran's story is an important step in healing that wound. Veterans need to tell their stories, and civilians need to listen.
Larry, you've had an unusual experience that most veterans don't get to do, and that is you've traveled both to Korea and Iraq. And as we film this particular series on June 25th, 1950 was the start of the Korean War. And our Department of Defense has acknowledged more than 40,000 servicemen lost their life, and certainly many, many more North and South Koreans as well as Chinese. And you had an opportunity to travel with not Veterans for Peace, but tell us a little bit about that.
Actually, my trip to Korea was with the Veterans for Peace group.
It was with Veterans for Peace,
there was
okay.
a Korea Veterans for Peace group. We were asked to come and stand in solidarity with some farmers in South Korea near Pyeongtaek who were being thrown off their land so that the United States could increase the size of the base there. We were able to speak to the Korean TV and news media. We spoke in front of several large crowds and got to meet some of the founders of the Korean Veterans for Peace group. And in South Korea, there's only one official veterans group that is government sanctioned, but there's a group of veterans in South Korea who believe, like we do, that we should be putting an end to war. And one of the brigadier generals from the South Korean Army, was the founder of the South Korean Veterans for Peace, and they invited us to come. They came and did a presentation at the annual convention, I can't remember, 2005, I think, and invited us to come and stand in solidarity with them and to learn about what's going on in Korea.
But you've also been to Iraq, and if I remember right, it was in Iraq that you actually joined Veterans for Peace.
It was. I actually hadn't heard of Veterans for Peace. Let me back up my story a little bit. We can talk about my Vietnam time
We
later.
will too, yes.
But when my son was about 12 years old, somewhere he read that he was going to have to sign up for selective service system, and he had no intention of doing this. We raised him properly. And so we looked into how you develop, how you prove that you're a conscientious objector and that it didn't just occur the day before that somebody called you to be. So one of the things we learned was that you should keep a catalog of different community events and things that you're involved with to show that this is a long-standing belief. And we started working with him at a Catholic worker farm in Chehalis. And through that group, we met the Fellowship of Reconciliation people in Lewis County and then in Western Washington. And through them, I met some folks who were setting up a trip to Iraq with Voices in the Wilderness, Kathy Kelly.
Yes.
And her
And
group.
what year was this?
And that was in August of 2000. So there was a group of about 10 of us that went to Iraq. We took medical supplies. At that time, the government threatened us with 12 years in jail and several $100,000 in fines because we were breaking the sanctions by taking, water purification stuff, Band-Aids, vitamin pills, blood bags, things like that. And I met Kathy in Basra on a 128-degree day where there was no electricity for the fans or anything. And one of the ways I have dealt with my situation of being in the military is through writing poetry. And so through our talk today, I'd like to share a few of the poems that I've written.
Well, we look forward to that.
And this is one that I wrote for Kathy or about Kathy when I was in Iraq. It's called Blessed Are the Peacemakers. The stench that rises from the bowel of the beast, fetid odor of the bodies of the children, mixed with the vapors of petroleum, sold as sweet perfume. As the bodies rot and the bones soften, they can be useful to lubricate the wheels of empire. Death is said to be life, and the price is said to be small. The small cry for peace from this frail woman in the black dress in the desert is to be sand and grit in the machine. Kathy's one of my heroes. So.
Larry, how and why did you enter the armed services? Now, this goes back to Vietnam, and we're all veterans from that particular era, but what is your story? How did you happen to get into the armed services?
I graduated from high school in 1965 and went to the University of Washington and spent most of that year partying and ended up with a pretty low grade point. I had been married at that time too, and about the time I was flunking out of school, that marriage was breaking up. And I didn't find this out until years later. My ex-wife's brother was a lifer in the Army, and he, on his way from Germany to Vietnam, stopped at the draft board in Seattle and informed them that I had lost my student deferral. And I don't know if you remember, in those days, they gave you 30 days notice usually when they drafted you. They gave me 10 days notice.
10 days?
Yeah, I had 10 days to get my stuff together. So it wasn't a voluntary thing. I considered the possibility of going to jail or going to Canada, but I was
Those were the two options at the time.
yes, I was raised as a good Catholic boy and did what I was told. So I reported for duty at Fort Lewis, and that's where I did my basic training. I went from there to...
And what year was that?
That was in '67, summer of '67.
I probably played for your pass and review in the 21st Army Band.
May have been.
Yes.
So then they sent me to Fort Polk in Louisiana,
Lovely place.
yes, known as the armpit of the Army at that time. And I did my AIT there.
And for
as well.
AIT, for our viewing audience?
Advanced infantry training.
Yes.
And from there I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky for 3 weeks to learn to be an armored personnel carrier driver. And I actually turned 21 on the flight home from Fort Knox to Seattle.
So you were the old man.
I was one of the older guys. And I was in Seattle for a couple of days, and then I flew to Vietnam. I was with the 4th Infantry Division.
Did you go out on the transports from the port of Tacoma?
No, I flew from McChord to Anchorage to Japan to Vietnam.
Because I remember 8 or 9 hour pass and review as we played the entire 4th Division out on troop ships.
No. I actually wasn't part of the 4th Division, I think, until I got to Vietnam.
Okay.
I don't remember that.
So you were
exactly.
going over just as an individual replacement.
Exactly. Yeah. At that time, they didn't. They basically sent individuals. They seldom sent whole units. I think they've learned that the unit cohesiveness is better sending, large numbers of people rather than individuals at the time.
Did you have a choice of your military occupation specialty?
No. They told me what I was going to be.
So you were in just for the 2 years with no choice.
24 months, no choice, go where you're told.
So you were U.S. and a serial number after that?
Yes, and I still vaguely recall it. It's imprinted in my brain somewhere. I was 21, but fairly naive. I had friends who were opposed to the war, but I didn't have any real strong political convictions. I'd seen John Wayne movies, but I had no real sense of what war was about. My dad was in the Second World War. He thought it was a fine thing to do.
There was some anti-war sentiment at the University of Washington at the time that you were there.
That was in '66?
That was '66, yeah.
So it was just getting started.
Just getting started,
There were a
yeah.
few underground newspapers and a few protest things, but it was mostly, it was pretty small then. The war was accepted mostly by the public. So I ended up in the bush in the Central Highlands. Spent most of the time between Kontum and Bamatui, the Idrang Valley. Despite what Richard Nixon said, we were in Cambodia in 1967 in pursuit of people. So basically, that's how I ended up in the service.
Were you journaling at the time or writing poetry? I know you write poetry now.
I've written poetry on and off since I was a kid. I wasn't writing much at that time, and I started off starting to keep a diary, but it ended up pretty sporadic. When you're there and it's people are shooting at you, not every day but fairly often, mines, rockets, you tend to close down. When I first got there, one of the things that dawned on me was, if you're going to call in artillery, you need to know where you are. And I looked around, and there weren't very few people who actually knew how to read a map. So I made it my business to learn how to read a map and to know exactly
good
where I
skill.
was, exactly where I was to the yard or the foot every time, everywhere I was in Vietnam, because it was a useful skill.
Did
like
they
you
rely
said.
on you to call in the artillery?
No, they didn't, but I wanted to be able to if I needed to, because generally it was basically just the officers who knew how to, do that kind of stuff. So I didn't trust the military officer structure.
Larry, most of the people our age have had very few opportunities to tell their story of what combat has done to them. You're an anomaly in this case in the fact that you've had more opportunity than others to speak about what war has done and what war is, and you've written about that in poetry as well. How did that come to be for you that you're able to do that? Because others have bottled that up for 30, 35 years.
Well, I actually, it was only about 10 years ago that I started, the process that started with my son asking the questions led to me becoming a member of Fellowship of Reconciliation, which led to Voices in the Wilderness, which led to Veterans for Peace. And it was when I got, to become a member of Veterans for Peace and could talk in the safety of veterans that I started actually to deal with a lot of those issues. There are things that I couldn't remember until after I started talking about it. There was a friend in Vietnam. He and I were just really tight, and yet I couldn't remember who he was.
Couldn't remember his name.
I couldn't remember his name. I couldn't remember his face. And he got in touch with me years later, and I couldn't remember who he was. But then I started. He sent me some pictures, and it started, making me remember. And this poem came out of that. Driving, I remember to note sights which would be good for an ambush. Walking, I watched the ground for dirt which may have been disturbed in the laying of mines. Nearly 40 years later, I still expect the bullet to hit that spot just below my left scapula that always itches like a target. Nearly 40 years later, I remember when we were boy warriors thrown together far from home. Gun smoke thick as fog, hot brass litter, the lamb-like smell of napalm, burnt indigenous personnel, piles of bodies, slowly moving limbs in rigor, green thick Vietnamese jungle, vines, sticky red clay mud in monsoon season. If he wasn't part of that piece of me that couldn't come home, maybe I could remember my friend's face nearly 40 years later. And so it was after I became involved with Veterans for Peace that I actually started dealing with that. So it's been about 10 years.
During that time that you were not remembering it, did you find it affecting your life?
Well, in retrospect, yes. I mean, I was married and divorced twice. I've always been a loner my whole life. I had nightmares. I don't like crowds of people. As I was living it, I wasn't consciously aware that those things that I had experienced but had never dealt with was causing me to act in certain ways. The nightmares that I have sometimes, that I wrote a poem that there was an incident in which I shot a Vietnamese officer in the face, and I wrote, "Nights he still comes to me, eyes clear, black and white, unlike his body, yellow and red. This specter of a rising tide of godless communism turning amidst the tangled pile of bodies. The 300 piastres and the red-starred belt I took from his body." You recall that was the reason we were in Vietnam, was to stop this godless tide of rising tide of communism, to stop the dominoes from falling.
And you've told me several times, Larry, that his eyes still come to you.
Yeah,
in,
yeah.
in, in nightmare.
I still see him. You know, there are things that are imprinted on your mind. The military and the whole situation of putting. When I got back, the thing that when I finally was able to get some perspective on it, the thing that just blew me away was the fact that society could take somebody, put them in a situation where you have to kill people to stay alive, and they tell you it's okay. That was the thing that just blew me away when I finally started dealing with it. That's a terrible thing for any society to do to people.
And that's one of the things. I mean, to get you to kill someone, they have to give you that permission.
They do, and they have to make it okay, which is even worse.
So stopping communism makes it okay.
You know, they don't even need to explain it that much. They just put you in a situation, and require that you do that in order to survive.
In fact, I recall part of the training is you walk down a trail and a target pops up, and your first thing is to shoot.
Exactly. The mindset is this. This is a poem that I wrote. It's called An Army of One. Do you hear the dead complaining? Killing is easy. It doesn't mean shit. What's that look for? You think I should be touched by the death of mother, brother, son, daughter, uncle, father, child? The only touch I feel is the half ounce of pressure on the trigger. Then I really get to be all I can be. And that's the mindset that is required in order to survive in combat. You have to block it off. No one else is human. The only people you care about are the soldiers on either side of you. That's the terrible thing. I can't even tell you how terrible that is to my consciousness, that they would make me be able to do this and it's okay. It just, it's beyond.
And it's so in contradiction to how you were raised.
I was raised as a good
boy.
Catholic altar boy. I was going to be a priest and the whole 9 yards. And
even if this were a just war, it still violates.
Exactly.
And I think that's something. Yeah, even when if you're being attacked and someone's trying to kill you, you may respond by attacking them and killing them, and it might be justified, but it's still not right.
Exactly.
You still have to deal with that.
But this is even removed from
Yeah.
that, because they put you in this situation purposely.
They weren't attacking you until you showed up in their country.
Exactly. I was the aggressor. I was attacking them. But you can't let yourself think that when it's happening.
Mark, what actually happened to you when you were in the service that really forever changed you? That you could say, this was the event that really forever changed me? Was it that North Vietnamese officer that you shot? Or what was it that you can definitely say, I was changed, can't go back, this is what changed me?
Yeah, it's hard. There were a lot of incidents that I couldn't let myself be aware of at the time. So it wasn't until years later, looking back, that in some ways I began to change. I remember one incident. I've never been even though I killed people, I was never a particularly violent kind of person. And we were in camp one night, and this guy was just really drunk and obnoxious, and he wanted to fight everybody. So I thought, here's an opportunity for me to see how violent, where the violence is in me. And he swung at me, and I was able to, duck easily enough. And I hit him. I hit him one time, and I realized that isn't who I was. But you can't, when you're in that milieu, you can't pursue that kind of thinking. It would just get you in trouble. I mean, I was a good soldier. I did what I was told. I kept my men safe. I made rank because I did well. I did all the things that I was supposed to do to be a good soldier. I was in the military for 19 months and 3 days, and I was E6 when I got out. So
That's
serious
amazing.
rank.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
just because you do what you're told and you follow the steps and you do it, But I hated being in the military. When I went, I came close to being killed quite a number of times, and I finally decided I was going to be golden. Nothing's going to happen to me. And at that time, if you had 5 months or less left of your 2 years that you were drafted for, when you got home, they let you out because there wasn't anything to do. So you extend your tour over there. So the day that I decided I was going to extend, I signed the papers at a water point. We went out on patrol, and we just got creamed in an ambush.
So you extended your tour while you were in combat.
While I was in combat, actually, yeah. Because by that time, a guy stood up 10 feet away from us and shot across us with on a spray of automatic. We were in 2 columns, and the guys on both sides of me got shot. A B-40 or B-20, B-40, whatever.
B-40,
anyway,
I think, of the
rocket came under my chin, close enough for me to feel the air.
The breeze there.
Just lots of times I came close, no scratches. So I decided I hated being in the military. I'll stay here longer so I can get out early. And then we got ambushed, and there were 69 of us got wounded that day out of the whole company because they just did a
Now
number
you
on
have
us.
Purple Heart?
I have Purple Heart from some grenade fragments from that. But that night I thought, what did I just do today? Sign the papers, so I extended. So I just kept my head down the rest of the time I was there. So I got on a helicopter one day. I flew to Tonsanut, got on an airplane, flew to Japan, Anchorage, McCord, got off the plane, slept at Fort Lewis. Next morning went to the quartermaster to get my mustering out pay. And because I was in the bush the whole time I was in Vietnam, I didn't collect any pay. I had nothing to spend it on. So I had 14 months of back pay coming. The guy hands me an envelope, and I open it up, and there was $1.86 in it. And it costs $1.85 to take the bus from Fort Lewis to Seattle, where I lived.
So you got $1.86 for 14 months?
So I ended up with 1 penny by the time I got home. And it seemed so apropos to how they had screwed me the whole time that to the last second they're going to do this. It took me 6 months to get my pay because they had screwed up the pay vouchers. But at the time, it just seemed so apropos of the way the military treats the veterans. They don't care. You're nothing to them.
Your obligation was done. They couldn't use you, so.
Yep, they don't care. There was no advice on getting jobs. There was no. I mean, like I say, it was 48 hours from being in the jungle to being on the streets of Seattle in the snow as a civilian. There was nothing to help you, make that change. Like you say, they were done with you. They had no more value.
Did anything happen to you when you were in combat that started you to think something's wrong with how I've been trained to this is not what I want? I'm not this type of person?
Like I said, it wasn't safe to let yourself think that way. There are some things that happened that just, would strike you, but you wouldn't dwell on them. You'd go on. I mean, I remember we were with armored personnel carriers, and we had C rations at that time. And a lot of times you'd drive along, and there'd be the kids at the side of the road. And people would take great pleasure in trying to pop the kids with these cans of C rations. And you see that happen, and it just kind of sets you back. But again, if you start thinking along those lines, you're going to start doing things that aren't safe. You're not going to survive either the military or being in combat if you start thinking those. You can't think that way when you're in combat. You have to close all that off and deal with it later. So,
What changed you after you got out of the service to what you're doing now?
it was just it was a progression, you know, becoming more, well, I stayed stoned for a good 3 years after I got out. I lived in the woods in Alaska, self-medicated basically. Then I learned meditation, and that allowed me a different avenue to open my consciousness. I studied a lot of Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy. That helped a lot. And it was just a progression of time. Ended up getting married again, had our son. That opens, you know, being a father makes you think about things differently. So it was just one thing kind of leading to the other. And over the course of time, I became more aware of the lies that the American Imperium tells the people. The whole it's, you know, it's all based on fallacies. The American Empire, America was created as an empire right from the get-go, and we've been expanding, and now we've encircled the whole globe, and there's nowhere else for us to go, and we're creating, you know, we're fouling our nest, and our nest is the whole earth. So it was just a progression.
When you left the service, then you had a GI Bill that you could use to go back to college to not pick up on the party
Right.
mode, but this time to
Yes.
figure out what it is that you wanted to do. Huh?
Yeah, I actually was studying philosophy at the University of Alaska on the GI Bill, and then I took enough philosophy classes to conclude that there wasn't anything you could know. So at that point, I decided to hitchhike to Guatemala, and so I went on the road for a while, hitchhiked around, and ultimately ended up, I did quite a number of jobs, and ultimately ended up going back to school and became a nurse, and I did that for the last 35 years before I retired. But I had waited long enough that the GI Bill didn't cover the school, because as you recall, at that time, I think you had to use it within 10 years,
Yes.
or you couldn't use it. So another little way of the government dealing.
One more
with.
little twist.
Yes. So shows you how much value you have.
Did you go into nursing as a result of your military experience, as a way of
You know, not
helping, or-
consciously, but in retrospect, I think I did. It's a way in this society that a man can be nurturing and empathetic and compassionate, and those were things that I needed to develop in myself in order to survive. So I didn't consciously do that, but I think that came out of that need in me.
Mark and I are part of veterans advocacy, where we help veterans like yourself know what their benefits and rights are with the Veterans Administration. And one of the things that we're all veterans from the era of Vietnam, and those that were in country were potentially exposed to Agent Orange. And in this state alone, there are 200,000 veterans, such as yourself, who are in country. And Mark, you were in country in Vietnam as well. And there are some illnesses, ischemic heart disease, Parkinson's disease, some of the others that's covered. Have you had any background with the Veterans Administration since you've left?
Actually, I developed diabetes about 6 or 7 years ago, and then found out that it was one of those conditions that
Presumptive for Agent Orange.
that's presumptive for Agent Orange. So I, contacted the VA to find out about it, and went through the process, and ended up with a disability based both on PTSD and diabetes with neuropathy.
Okay.
So so I think the VA system is a good system if you have help figuring out how it
Yes.
works.
Yeah.
And that's what we do as advocates, is help, because a lot of guys come out and they don't want to deal with that. It's
Exactly.
another bureaucracy.
Right.
So, we've been away from it. We have a little opportunity to understand it and work with them.
Yeah. I think it has pretty much what veterans need, but that getting through the paperwork and all that, that's where a lot of, if you've been in combat, you tend to get frustrated easily because you want things to happen right now, and it doesn't happen right now. So that's where I think the Veterans Advocacy Group is very useful.
Larry, we have just about 3 or 4 minutes left. Why don't you pick out some of the poems that you'd have that you'd like to share as we close this session on soldier stories, paths to healing.
Okay, this one is called Smell of War. The war was black and white at first, but then in living color, red and yellow and khaki green, brought into the living room. But what was missing was the smell of war. My war smelled of dying vegetation, ode to Agent Orange, burnt gunpowder and burnt people, dark blood, sweet and warm, piss, shit, sweat, testosterone. The same smell is found in what is left of a pizza shop in Jerusalem. Now the smell of war is in Jenin and Ramallah. Piss and shit and blood mixes with the frustrated cries of the people. Helen Caldecott holds up a picture of a baby with his head blown off. The smell of his head seeps up through the concrete rubble after the tanks roll on. The same smell of piss and shit and blood rose in the hot desert some days after soldiers were buried alive. The same smell at Waco when the embers burned. The smoke cleared. The same smell was found by firefighters and police digging beneath the Twin Towers space. The same smell, more blood, was found near Kabul, raised with the dust by bombs from 40,000 feet. Next, we'll find the same smell in some new axis of evil. The smell of oil added to the smell of dead children, added to the putrescent odor of war and death. However, as Erasmus said 500 years ago, war is sweet to those who know it not. And I have one final poem if we have time.
Short one, I trust.
Okay.
Okay.
This is called Answering a Question. The first man I killed was small and hidden in the tall grass. Being a killer forever changes you. Even if you learn to be kind and considerate and civilized, that part of you is always hiding down inside, awaiting a chance. A normal person does not want to kill and will avoid it at all cost. The military will not let you remain normal. It doesn't matter if you think you are smart enough not to get caught up in their lies. They will change you. Don't be sucked into the biggest myth and lie that dying for your country is somehow heroic. Really be all that you can be. Thank you. I think it was E.E. Cummings who wrote a poem called "I'll Teach You How to Perform a Funeral." This is "I'll teach you how to perform a war." I will teach you how to perform a war, a clean operation, to remove that dangerous tissue which can no longer be controlled. We first call it a cancer. We curse it for an inhuman bastard, nothing legitimate to be found. The pathologic question must be asked and answered, weighing whether a pound of flesh will be enough. Shared definitions in hand, we sharpen our knives, sanitary, chrome and steel, bright lights, remove any shadow of doubt, patriotic anesthesia dulls the senses, common and other, to the loud, cutting, ripping and bleeding to come, once hidden, viscera bloody red, broken bone white, and hypoxic blue tissue stare out at us. Unexpected collateral damage can be dressed with sterile white gauze, although the bloated smell sometimes remains. Afterwards, we will remove our gloves and wash our hands. And then this poem's called "Answering a Question." The first man I killed was small and hidden in the tall grass. Being a killer forever changes you. Even if you learn to be kind and considerate and civilized, that part of you is always hiding down inside, awaiting a chance. A normal person does not want to kill and will avoid it at all cost. The military won't let you remain normal. It doesn't matter if you think that you are smart enough not to get caught up in their lies. They will change you. Don't be sucked into the biggest myth and lie that dying for your country is somehow heroic. Really be all that you can be. Thank you. Okay, our first featured poet tonight is John Samuel Tiemann. He served with the 4th Infantry Division in Vietnam. After leaving the Army, he used his GI Bill to earn a bachelor's degree and his MA from Southern Methodist University and his PhD from St. Louis University. His poetry is published locally, nationally, and internationally in translation. Publishers include America's Review, Caribbean Quarterly, Charlton Review, Cimarron Review, English Journal, Iowa Review, and River Styx. The Pittsburgh Quarterly Online publishes a collection of his poetry entitled Morning Prayers. His first prose submission, an eyewitness account of the 1985 Mexico City earthquake, appeared in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Dr. Tiemann teaches high school and middle school English in the St. Louis Public Schools and is an adjunct professor at Lindenwood University. Please welcome John Tiemann. And I'd like to end with one more poem. Those of you who were in Seattle last year at the banquet may have heard Sam Hamill do a poem. And when Sam said the name of his poem, I misheard what he said, and I ended up writing this poem. This is called Lies Wide Open. I heard Sam Hamill say the title of his poem as Lies Wide Open, but when he spoke of an olive-skinned girl peering from a photograph, I thought maybe he said, "It lies wide open, like your sister after she's been raped, like my broken heart, like possibilities, like the road to destruction, like the way to peace, like music playing in the night, like the door to the mosque, like the soldier's abdomen, like an unfinished hard luck story, like a beloved community, or maybe, he said, lies wide open, untruths, all, like honeyed words dripping from the politicians, like theological support for war, like comfortable liberals unwilling to rock the boat, like propaganda called news, like support the troops, like freedom and democracy, like the American dream, like the bottom line. Or maybe he meant eyes wide open. Thank you. And thanks.
I love my life. I love my wife and kids. I would die for them. I would even. I want to live just like the other fellow on the other side. He loves the air he breathes. The other side. He loves the life he leads. I needed work. I was just a poor boy saw no other way out. God save my soul. I was put in harm's way, now I must speak out. Get out of this bad dream. I'm gonna speak out about their crazy schemes. Every night when I go to sleep, I can't close my eyes because of what I've seen, what I've seen. I pray to God, won't you let me have some peace? Peace, I thought that I was fighting for. Well, it escapes me. Tell us the truth about depleted uranium. What if I want a child? Will she be whole? Or will she struggle with this dirty war? It blocks out all of the sun. This dirty war, it poisons everyone. Don't you see what they have done? They're exploiting every mother's son, every mother's son. Now they send our daughters to their dirty war. We are not their pawns, we are not their whores. We are the children of America. We are the mothers of America. We are the fathers of America. We are the brothers of America. We are the sisters of America. Soldiers, speak out. We can tell the truth of what we've seen. We are not liars. Soldiers, speak out. We have a duty to all children and to their future.